Hi, and welcome back to the BA Project, where we talk about the good, the bad, and this week, the conflict within business analysis. My name is Drew, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Catherine and Christina, as always. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hi, guys. So this week, we're going to be chatting about a topic that everyone experiences at some point. It's a topic that is rarely discussed unless you're in the thick of it, and that is conflicts at work. Each of us have experienced it to varying degrees, from company to company, from project to project, or role to role. So today we're going to dig into it and talk about some ways we can navigate it and come out on the other side. Use your words, Drew. First up, we're going to take a broad view and look at what happens what happens to a team when you experience conflict. So, struggling to speak today. When we're talking about conflict within a team, it doesn't have to be a BA team or a tech team. I think it could be any team in any workplace. And depending on the people that are involved, the tasks that are involved, and then I think the source of the conflict itself, it can impact teams in different ways. Can we have a chat then in broad terms about the direct impact to the people that are involved? And that doesn't have to be the two people where there is conflict, maybe the wider team as well. What have you guys seen in your experience?
I think from my perspective, we always do this. It's like we've got the same initials, we have the same thought process, the same pause process.
This is a great example of conflict. Christina, use your voice. We hear you.
You go first, Catherine. Lady in red, you go first.
Oh, thank you. Do you have to sing it?
No.
Well, I think the first thing is the structure of the team. I think depending on if you have a lot of junior people on the team or a lot of senior people, that can change how the team actually come together on a conflict or what their reaction to conflict is. Because I think more junior resources, and especially if you're actually not even necessarily junior, but if you're newer to a team, you're more likely to actually get worried about your position and you're going to doubt yourself, and it's a real chance for imposter syndrome to actually seep in. Whereas I think sometimes if you're senior, one of the negative elements of that is that you almost kind of double down and you're kind of like, no, I've been pushed around before and this is my chance to actually kind of lay down like the law or lay down like my interpretation of what's happening. So I think in both sides you can have almost negative reactions, but they're very different reactions. So I think when it comes to resolution, it has to be a different resolution depending on who you're talking to as well.
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, no matter how hard your delivery is, if you have a sense of camaraderie and there isn't that conflict and that icy atmosphere, literally no matter how bad things are, you can always take it back to having a laugh and seeing the light in a situation. But when there's some element of conflict, even if it's only between two, like you said, Drew, like two resources, it still impacts the rest of the team because you maybe aren't as comfortable to bring those two resources into a call, whereas before you throw everybody in. And it's just, if people are aware that there's some sort of conflict going on, it makes it a little bit more uncomfortable for everybody else and having to tiptoe around it. But I think we as BAs have our project managers are obviously very heavily involved in trying to keep that harmonious relationship. But we did have a previous guest that called us the heartbeat of the project, which I will never forget. But I do think we, especially senior BAs, have a bit of a responsibility to try and identify those little frictions and see how can we help overcome that without it becoming a bigger thing that it has to be. So I think it's the overall camaraderie is lost and the willingness to like muck in and get in the trenches and do a few extra hours to get things over the line. I think if there's conflict and there's an icy atmosphere, then that falls away and people aren't as willing to work for each other as they would be when there's a harmonious relationship.
And do you guys think with conflict within a team, is there factors at play, or can there be factors at play when there's conflict within a team that might be a line in the sand where there's no coming back from it? Or do you think every solution or every situation is rescuable? Have you guys, from your experience, been in an environment where, okay, it's just done now, let's call it? Or is there always hope? Catherine, go to you first, maybe.
Thank you, Drew, for giving us structure. I suppose that always comes down to personalities, because definitely for me, I think the best relationships I have at work are the ones where you can have a blowout and then walk outside and have a cup of tea, and that's kind of an easier way, because you know that no matter if that person is getting emotional, or if that person's getting kind of, heightened and aggressive is probably a bit too harsh of a word, but if that person's getting heightened, you can kind of say, I know this is a moment in time. And I think if people afford you that, you're more forgiving and you're more kind of likely to come around. So I do think it's personality based. I think at times there can be just, look, there's two people who just won't get on, and that's just the nature of their personalities. And it's maybe up to then the leader of the team, being a team lead or be a project manager or BA lead, to actually try and facilitate ways that they can break down whatever block that is, because that's nature. You're not going to get on with everybody, but it's trying to find some sort of common thread and some sort of camaraderie that binds you together.
I think you're right, and I think sometimes it's down to the nature of the conflict as well, right? Like when I think of it, before this, I was trying to think of the types of conflict that you might come in contact with throughout working in project work, working as a BA or in tech projects, and I was going to categorize them. And I think your conflict around process roles, responsibilities, and that grey area, ambiguity can breed conflict. But also then there's ones that's really difficult to address, which is the conflict with regards to personality and personality clashes. You can teach somebody a process, you can learn about ways of working. It's really difficult to learn a new personality. So I think that can play a big part too. And maybe that's like what you're referring to there, where that could be the line in the sand where it just might not be able to rescue it.
And knowing your own personality, even, like, because you might have a certain way of working with that is great with one person, and then all of a sudden that changes. And I think whatever about seeing a different personality in somebody else, that's outward looking, and it's probably easier than that inward looking and saying, well, how am I different here, and why am I different, and how can I change? Because working on yourself and working on how to change your little idiosyncrasies are always going to be the harder part, I think.
Yes, remind me to Google idiosyncrasies after this call. My little notebook here. With your experience, Christina, like, have you been in situations, maybe not directly, or been like a witness to situations where you haven't been able to rescue it, and what was leading up to that? Where, what was that line in the sand where you said, okay, it's too much, we need to reset here?
Yeah, I think it probably nothing personally, but I have sort of witnessed where people's integrity has been questioned, and that's where I could imagine
that's tough.
that a line could be drawn, because everybody does make mistakes. That's fine. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has little personality clashes. There's things that maybe people do. Like, I know I ramble a lot, and that can be frustrating for people, and that could get someone's back up, but that's just who I am. That's not something that can be changed, and I wouldn't take that overly personally. But if somebody was questioning integrity around if I missed a requirement, and somebody tried to say that I purposefully missed that requirement and tried to cover it up, or tried to go back in time and say that a requirement was always there when I knew that it wasn't, it's things like that where you think that somebody's being malicious and somebody's sort of questioning your integrity and not able to trust you. I think that does happen in project teams as well, especially when we get talking about commercials. Sometimes there can be a bit of blame and finger pointing and things like that, and I would imagine that that's pretty hard to come back from if you're questioning somebody's intentions around why they have or haven't done something. For me, that would be something that would be hard to come back from, because we're all one team. We're all trying to achieve one common goal, and blaming each other isn't going to achieve anything. And it could, if you're just constantly getting that could be difficult. But when you mention personalities, what is that? Is that book Surrounded by Idiots? Is that the one that's got all the different color groups in it and things like that?
That's just the other podcast that we have
about each other. But there's that. I'd say I haven't read it, but it's been recommended to me so many times about how you've got to adapt your communication style depending on who you're talking to, and that book describes the different types of personalities by color. And if you can identify, like say I was a green and Catherine was a yellow, there's a certain way that greens should communicate with yellows, and it helps you understand basically not how not to pee someone off. But you know, that let that person be who they are, and you can be who you are yourself. But it kind of teaches you how those two personality types can work harmoniously. So I'm talking about a book that I haven't read. I should probably read it.
I like being a colour though.
I thought that the best kind of review.
Yeah, I've heard about it. There's probably Chinese whispers all the way down the line, but no, it's been recommended to me like a few times to read it. So I'll read it by the end of this year. I'll read it and I'll blog post it. How about that?
Yeah, you can do a video review.
Yeah.
With conflict, though, I think, well, for me, I don't know, maybe it's the optimistic side of me, but I would like to think there are a few scenarios that you can't come back from at all, that we have that like line in the sand. But
yeah,
so much of it to me is how we approach conflict and the steps that we take, because I think it does need to be methodical. You can't just go in like full steam ahead without consideration for the person that's in front of you, the human that's in front of you. So that's, I think it's an important topic, and that's why it's actually our next topic. Trust conflict, the worst segue. So when I talk about steps and being methodical, for me, I know for you guys, it's absolutely true as well. I would always hope that you can resolve it within your group, whether that's your team in work, whether that's a project team, whether that's between you and a peer in work or someone in the same business area, before it has to reach your manager or their manager or somebody that's a third party. I think that gives us the best shot at rescuing that relationship between those two people, those two individuals. Have you guys got any tips yourself for addressing that conflict and coming out of it with maybe even a better relationship on the other side? Christina, I'm going to go to you.
Come to me first. I was like nodding the head at Catherine there. For me, it's probably coming back to something that I always say, which is don't be the alpha in the room. Even if you believe that you are right, we can only control our own actions. We can't control other people's reactions to what we do. So I like to just maybe take a step back, and if my pride has to take a wee kick, that's okay, because ultimately it's more important to resolve the relationship and to be able to move forward. So I would say younger me would have been a bit more hot-headed and not really have taken that step back, but older, and I hope wiser me, is able to take a step back and realize that I don't have all the answers, and to not be the alpha in the room, and to pull it back and see it from another person's perspective and just be a bit more empathetic. I'd say I'm not really good with empathy most of the time, but if I can identify where something is maybe a bit tarnished or a bit tender, then I need to turn the empathy side of Christina on and lean into that to be able to get past it, because ultimately, again, everything's going to be easier to work through if that relationship can be repaired. It's going to be difficult for everybody trying to do everything if that's not fixed. And that's just what I keep in the back of my mind, that we've got to fix this.
There's two things for me there. One, you are super empathetic. One of the most empathetic people I've ever met in my life.
Oh, gosh.
And two, it's hard to believe there's more levels of hot-headedness that we haven't seen. So that's interesting as well.
So to say, the further north you go, the more hot-headed the women are. So, yeah, I've heard that a couple of times.
That's
dogs are softies. Just keep going up to Belfast.
Before, so.
Maybe it works both ways. Maybe it's like the more northerly and the very southernly, the ladies are hot-headed.
I can't come out with this conversation. So let's just move on. Catherine, addressing conflict.
Like, this is really easier said than done, and I definitely find it difficult to do. So it's one of like, do what I say, not as I do. But I think doing it early, people will annoy you by something they say, or a way that they work. And if you call that out and say, oh, look, I work a little bit differently, and I don't like morning meetings, I prefer afternoon meetings, so something like that, that's a really easy thing to change. But if you get 3 months deep into something and then you try and change it, firstly, that person's going to be caught unawares, which I really don't like. I think you have to get people where it's completely legitimate that they're unaware of your what might have hurt you, or what might be a sensitive topic for you, or whatever it is. You kind of have to let them know, to give them the best chance of being on your side. And I think you have to give yourself the best chance, because if in 3 months' time you end up having a meltdown, you're going to end up doing that thing of you did this, and you're going to end up with a long list of issues, which is just going to make everything snowball. So I think as much as possible, try and say things as early as possible, when you're not going to be as emotional, you're not going to be as defensive, that person's not going to be as defensive either, and that will help you just kind of say, that doesn't suit me, and move on, and the relationship doesn't kind of get tarnished by it. So that would kind of be mine. It's really difficult though, and like, especially if it's a new person where you're trying to give them a bit of chance and you're trying to let things go. But ultimately, if you know it's going to affect you, or you're going to think about it in a month's time, just say it right then and there.
Thank you.
Drew, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
With in your position, Drew, I'm sure you're faced with lots of areas of conflict, but you've got to go both ways. So you've got to manage conflict up, and then you've got to manage conflict down as well. And I'm sure you have to have very different personas depending on what way you're going or trying to mitigate that conflict. So how do you address that conflict, and is it different going up versus down?
It's a really good question. So I address it a lot differently now than I did when I first became a leader and I started out my own people leader journey. The biggest learning I've taken away is patience and facts. So what I like to do, if I have a scenario with two people in my team or extended teams or other parts of the business, I need to understand the facts of the situation, be patient enough to speak with the interested parties. And that doesn't mean just the people who are directly involved with the conflict. It needs to be the people that are secondarily involved. Maybe they're people leaders, or maybe they're support network, people they're confident enough to be able to lean on after I have a difficult conversation with them. So they're prepared to support them as well. And that patience can be tough, because the people that are involved in the conflict need the resolution. The interested parties you need to speak to, excuse me, maybe a project manager, for example, could have commercials or payment milestones hanging on this conflict resolution. But in order to rescue the relationship and for sustained success in that relationship, you need to have patience to make sure you're serving both parties correctly. And that can be really challenging. But they're my biggest learnings, patience and facts.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Before we move on to the next topic, I've got some interesting stats. So it's stat time, and you actually need to get a banner for stat time. So if I was to ask you guys, on a given week, how much time do people spend dealing with conflict of all sorts and sizes? How much time do you reckon? Can you stab in the
Well, there's a difference between what I'd hope it is, and I suppose on average, I'd probably say an hour, 2 hours.
A week? Are you saying just a week?
Yeah,
I feel like it. I feel like I deal with some sort of conflict every single day.
But you're a leader.
Okay.
Does that, maybe people who are just kind of, well, you would hope that people who aren't managing might have less.
Might have a nicer life. Da-da-da.
Easy.
Go on, tell us, Drew. The suspense is killing.
So on average, people spend in navigating conflict, I guess, a week, 2.8 hours a week, every single week.
That's quite a lot, isn't it? Like,
yeah, I was surprised by that. Now, we do have to have the caveat that this data is based on the employment population in the US, and also it doesn't define the level of conflict. So it could be somebody that's put out that someone ate their sandwich, which would cause me to go into conflict, or it could be something more severe and a human rights issue, for example. So it's a big breadth there of issues. But interesting to see that that's a lot of time.
And I think like one of the key things as well, what would be interesting to look at is the level of conflict in consultancy versus kind of your kind of day-to-day industry, because I think with consultancy, there is an element of there is a client, you have to get things done. Your deadlines are probably a little bit more strict. I don't know. I say this, but I'm obviously open to being wrong about it, but I would imagine that maybe consultancy drives a little bit more conflict.
I'm glad you're open to being wrong. I actually have a counter to that argument.
Oh wow,
Devil's
lovely.
advocate here. So with
Patience
consultancy,
and
like I
facts.
agree. Patience and facts. God, I knew that was going to come back to haunt me. I think actually public sector jobs, maybe jobs in government could breed a lot of conflict as well. If you have people that might work in public sector, maybe there is longevity there. Somebody who has a long tenure in a role or position, who has that job security and confidence, that is a real benefit of working in the public sector that you just don't have in a private organization to the same level. Maybe that would give you the confidence or maybe the false security or safety net to go into a situation and I don't know, drive conflict or be more comfortable in conflict more than a private organization.
That's a really good point. Yeah. God damn.
I didn't have a stat for that. I do have one more for you though before we move on.
Oh, wow.
So this one's really interesting. Yeah. So according to the same source, 25% of employees would rather call in sick instead of addressing conflict head on. Are you surprised by that? Quarter of the employee base.
I'm surprised by that because, and again, this comes down to individual personalities. But that couldn't be me. Like, I'm not saying I love a bit of conflict, but I love the opportunity to try and resolve it. That would just fester on me if I thought, and again, going back to like a much younger Christina, I thought that everybody was annoyed at me at all times, and then it just festers with you. Whereas now, if I thought there was conflict with me or somebody in my team or whatever, I would be dying to get out in front of it and resolve it. I would never phone in sick to avoid it. But I wonder, is that just different personality types, or I suppose maybe years of doing it that you become less scared of it? I can understand why people would be afraid to confront it because there are knock-on effects, there are ramifications, but I just know how much it can fester with you, and I know that feeling's not nice, you know.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I think one of the key things around this, and especially with conflict resolution, is your approach to it could be so different when you have a support network. So I know at times where I may have had conflict, I would have had good support there for either of you guys, I would just ring and have a 20-minute rant. And then I'm calmer because I've done the whole, word vomit to you guys. And I think if you have support, you probably don't feel that worried about it because you feel like, okay, I've knocked ideas off someone else and I've got my own opinions across, and actually now I can come back down to maybe a 50% or whatever, 95% usually. But you can kind of bring yourself a little bit down. So I think if you don't have that support network, for sure, I can see the benefit of just being like, I'm not doing that today. And I'm kind of, so hopefully you would hope that people would have enough around them and cushion around them that they don't feel like they need to do that. But yeah, that's a bit worrying. Like, it's worrying from a business perspective of how much that would take from a business, because if people are calling in sick to avoid it, that means that you there's no way that you're getting that resolved quickly.
And there's different types of conflict as well. There's overt conflicts, like you said earlier on, it can be perceived as aggression and sometimes all out aggression. Excuse me. But there's also, I think, maybe passive conflict or maybe passive aggressiveness that can be construed as conflict, where people don't agree on, maybe it could be a planning exercise or a task, any task across any industry. And there could be maybe some resentment there, or maybe imposter syndrome, whatever it is, it's breeding a situation that makes people uncomfortable to talk about. And that could absolutely be a reason why someone doesn't call in sick, because they don't want to face that work day because somebody else is going to butt against them. But that doesn't have to be overtly, I'm angry at you, or you're not doing this. It could be and under the surface. Oh, have I gone? Am I back? So, and then you mentioned as well the support network. Not everyone has one, and not everybody is confident enough to be able to reach out. And that's the topic, or our next topic of discussion, is knowing when to reach out and knowing when to reach upwards as well, and to escalate that if you feel that yourself and that person can't resolve it, or either yourself or the other person is refusing to engage and resolve it. You should absolutely follow the process that should be in place in your organization to get that resolution. So with, I suppose it's more of an art than a science, really, in knowing when to escalate. For me, it's when it's starting to have an impact on your work and maybe your day-to-day, absolutely your health and your mindset. But it's different for everybody. It's different from person to person. When I might escalate could be different to both of you guys. You're both stronger than me with personalities and being confident enough to be able to push back on people, maybe, or when we talk about conflict, I'm not a person who naturally is okay with it, but it's something I have to work at, and it's something I had to work at over the course of years. So I think it's different from person to person. Catherine, can you talk to me, or talk to both of us a little bit about timing and how we go about bringing the next level in?
Yeah, I think one of the other things that actually, I was at a webinar recently around imposter syndrome and kind of negative thoughts. And one of the things that I think is really not interesting, but it's really important in scenarios like this is to actually note down the facts, as you said, Drew, and what actually happened, because there's a lot of, I might have a kind of slight conflict with somebody, and if I walk out of that room and think about it for 4 hours, I'm naturally going to increase the level of maybe what they said, or I'm going to read too much into tone. So I think if you can write things down in, okay, what actually happened and how did that actually make me feel? Because sometimes we do have to come back to it in a day later and just say, okay, what was that as bad as I thought it was? And also I think that helps you identify when is your point to escalate, because the next thing that's going to happen when you escalate is that person's going to actually ask you what happened. And if it's tone of voice, or if you can't really pinpoint things, you might feel a little bit worse, because then that person's not really seeing your point of view. So I think you kind of have to work on that first, just to cover yourself as well. I think if you have tried, if you've noted down things, if you've tried with the person one-on-one, I think rather than going up a level, it's better to kind of go sideways and say, this person has spoken to me like this. Do they speak to you like that? Get a sense of, is this something that's naturally happening, or maybe there's something going on in that person's life that you're not aware of, that maybe you just need to give them a little bit more of a grace period, or a little bit more.
Yeah.
Huh?
Everyone has bad days.
Exactly. And I think sometimes we can think that that's targeted, when actual fact it's just that person has blasted through their day like a bull in a china shop, and that's absolutely fine. But we need to know when it's personal and when it's not. So I think there is a level of due diligence that has to happen, because if you don't do that, you are actually going to become the issue of the escalation, rather than and get it to a place where you want it to be. So I think you have to do a little bit of that. But for sure, I think you have to think about if this has happened more than twice or 3 times, if you've spoken to other people and they don't see it the way you see it, or they don't have that same interaction. So you have some sort of evidence that maybe it is a bit more personal, or that it's or that that you feel like you've done enough on your own side. I think that's a good point to kind of bring in a manager.
Thank you. Christina, from your experience, have you found that there's been times when maybe you haven't gotten the timing right, and that could be with your own situation, or people that report into you as a BA leader, or people in a project? Maybe you can talk to us about your experience in trying to get the timing right and bringing people in.
Yeah, one thing that there's sort of two conflicting things that I have with escalation and when to do it. So there's the minute that you escalate something or somebody, it potentially creates a perception of that person for the other people that you've escalated to, which you might have wanted to avoid. Like, you want to keep it as long as you can, try and fix it yourself, because you don't want somebody else to think negatively about how this person has reacted in this specific situation. nobody's ever going to get all of the context, no matter how well you try and relay it. You're going to change somebody's opinion of that person. And if you can fix it yourself and keep everybody else out of it, and you can make sure that it's squashed and the risk is gone, then great, keep it away from everybody else. But then again, as a leader, I suppose legally and remaining compliant and making sure that you escalate at the appropriate times, so that if it does go further and anything happens, you've crossed your T's and dotted your I's and made sure that you've followed the correct policies and procedures. So I do think it's like a really tough thing to get right, as to when you escalate, to keep yourself and your organization right, but not too early, so that you change somebody's perception of somebody else unnecessarily when it was maybe a one-off or something like that. But I have in the past potentially escalated or brought somebody else in too early and asked a hypothetical question, or how could I manage this? And then that other person, like in previous organizations, I'd sought advice from HR on an issue, and then they completely jumped on it. But I didn't mention names. I wanted advice, and then they were straight on it, saying, wanting to know all the detail. And it wasn't at the point where I wanted it to go further. I was just asking for some advice, and then that jumped on it, and it escalated too quickly. So I think it's using like your peer network that you have around you to seek advice, because chances are somebody's dealt with it before and they know how to manage it without going to the people that are really going to jump on it from a legal perspective. I suppose that I've experience of maybe getting other people involved too early rather than too late. And again, that just comes from years in the game of trying to identify when is the right point to bring other people in. But I think we have a duty of care as leaders to do everything that we can before we start reaching out to other people and involving other people, and then maybe impacting somebody's progression or career or something unnecessarily. I think it's a really hard one to get right, timing wise.
Yeah, I think it's so tough, and I think that it's a hard one to even know yourself, because if you think of, well, I want to tell my manager this, you have to be comfortable that your manager then may need to take it elsewhere.
Yes,
so
it's not yours anymore. Yeah,
it's not yours anymore. And so the things that you've said, not that they can be held against you, you'd hope that would never be the case, but they will be brought to a more open forum, and you have to be comfortable that that's not yours anymore. And that's a really difficult thing, because you know, as much as you might want to have a one-on-one conversation with your manager has that due diligence, and that's not the way it's going to end. So I think that's why it's important to jot down all of the things that are happening, make sure that it's not just a once-off, make sure that you've given people the benefit of the doubt as well, the way you would want to be treated, you know, and maybe ask them straight out and try and deal with it yourself. But I think if you can look back on all those things and it's still not right, and you've done all of those things, that's a point to escalate for sure.
I always remember a time really early in school, like in secondary school, it was like first year or something, and I had noticed that somebody in my class was bunking off school all the time, and I knew about it. They weren't getting caught, but I thought,
you know, did you tell?
Told on you. No, I didn't. But no, they were bunking off school, and I was kind of worried that something was going on at home. I thought there was more to it, and I went to my form teacher and I was like, if I tell you something, can you promise you won't tell anybody else, and you can just like tell me how I should manage this? And they were like, no, I can't tell you that I won't tell anybody else. And I was like, right, well, I'm not telling you then. And that was a situation where I just wanted some help to understand if there was something I could do to help this person out in my class. But if I mentioned it, you know, if I was going to say, I think there's something going on at home, my form teacher would have said, well, why do you think that? And I would have had to say, well, they're bunking off school all the time. And then they would have got in trouble. So that's like an example of where I just wanted advice, but I knew I was going to get somebody else in trouble. And that wasn't for me to get them in trouble. It's not the same as being an adult now. And do you know what I mean? It is fundamentally different, but that always sticks with me when I'm trying to make the decision as to whether I need to go and ask somebody else for help when that person is in a position of power and they may need to take it somewhere else, or is there a peer group that I know it's safe in that I can ask for advice, and it's up to me to make that decision as to when that goes to HR, for example. So
Christina, is this your analogy for telling me that somebody from the BA project has been bunking off work? Through the process of elimination, there's only one other person. That's me, yeah. So you mentioned a few minutes ago there with escalating, you're also trying to protect the team and the project, which is really interesting because the very first topic we mentioned was what happens to a team when there's conflict, and there can be like direct and secondary impact. Can we talk a little bit about mitigating the risk to the project or the team? When there is conflict, I think that the impact can be seen in tons of different ways, but what you don't really see is the process in which you might prevent that impact. It's so interesting. I think when you look at like maybe the bottom line financial impact of two people downing bills and refusing to work, that's really clear and easy to see. But what you don't see maybe is the relationship between those people and the customer, or the perceived brand damage that a company might undergo from seeing two people like quabble in a workshop in front of a customer, for example. Like again, like I've seen it, and it's a car crash to watch. So like let's have a chat then about things that we could do to protect the team, the customer, and like the project itself from that conflict. I can go first. So I think one thing is when we were talking about facts and patience, is having those people together in a room and trying to ring fence that and keep it as a moment in time, and make sure that happens away from the other team members if possible, and you only have the involved interested stakeholders as part of that closed loop, and then you set clear boundaries and next steps for resolution. So if you're meeting with both of those people, you give them both an option to have a voice, and then you mediate, and then you let them have rebuttals back and forth, and then afterwards you summarize and you let them know in fact in what happens step by step, and you try as much as possible to keep emotion a passenger in the conversation. You can't get rid of it completely, but you want to lean on facts as much as possible, and you would hope that in the cold light of day and upon reflection, as both of you guys mentioned, that you're able to focus more on the facts than you will the emotion. And that's a difficult thing to do, but if you're able to ring fence that, have that conversation offline, in person if possible, but away from the team and definitely away from your customers, that's going to go a long way to protecting and preserving the progress that you've made. Not always that easy, unfortunately.
How do you get two people to stop fighting in front of a customer?
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of kicking under the desk, under the virtual desk. I've been not in the current company I'm currently work with before that, but I've been in a situation where people have thrown a lot of evil eyes at people across a desk like this. Yeah, nice. I worked in an organization that was really good at evil eye.
The evil eye were good. I just have an evil eye by default, though. So how do you?
No, it's a lazy eye. Yeah. No.
That's
easy
not
to make up. Yeah. Are there any steps that you guys can think of that would help to kind of protect that team, the project, the customer, and create that kind of boundary or a safe place that you can have that conversation in isolation?
I think it's really hard, because I think these are the type of things that you have to put in place before conflict happens. I think it's better, like if you're having a stand-up meeting or if you're having a team meeting, if you set the tone of what that meeting's about and that it's fun and people can be themselves and they can talk about holidays and they can talk about what's going on in the real world, I think that sets you up for success, because then you've created a space that people feel comfortable to debate with each other or counter each other. And it's not in a point where they're going to be heightened or emotional. So I think you kind of have to start these things before you even get to like a kind of a crucial point in your project or team. And I think setting boundaries for how people work together is and setting a tone for what the culture is. Definitely when I meet people who are new to my team, I would always chat to them about the type of manager I am and how I don't expect to have to check in on them, at 9 o'clock in the morning, and that's not what I'm going to do. And I would always say to them, just don't blindside me with things, bring it to me, talk to me about it. And I think you kind of have to set out your stall as a manager, be a project manager or team manager. And I think that is the best way to mitigate any of the risks.
Yeah, and just on what Catherine said about setting out your stall, like there's definitely things, I think every individual needs to be accountable for the things that they know that they do that could cause conflict. Like if I take me, for example, with customers, I like to chip in on demos. Like when devs are doing their demo, I like to add a bit of business context, but I appreciate that could disrupt somebody's flow and that could really annoy them. Yeah, like I just like to say, oh, well, we're doing this because of this requirement, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't suit everybody. Like that really doesn't. And that somebody could be like, Drew, you're a prepper. You like to have like a script and things like that sometimes. And that's completely alien to me. But I know that for a lot of devs, they have a script that they run through. They've got their data set out. And if Christina's chirping in every 5 minutes, disrupting their flow, that could cause conflict. So when there's a new like a new team mobilized or a new developer comes on, I would set that out and say, look, I like to do this to add that context, but if you're not comfortable with that, let me know and I won't. So we are responsible for the things that maybe aren't traditional to our role or we appreciate might annoy somebody else. Set it out and say, look, I'm used to doing this, but if you're not comfortable with it, then let me know and I won't do it. Because it's the same thing when it comes down to different cultures and things like that. Like we all are responsible for outlining what we are and aren't comfortable with. Otherwise, people don't know everything. You don't know what you don't know. So I just think that if we can own our own stuff and give people the option to either push back or accept it, and the same with other people, that can help to mitigate some of that conflict that may arise and disrupt a project team.
I think that is the perfect way to end this podcast. Own your own stuff. It's really powerful. And being that honest with yourself and introspective can go a long way to rescuing any relationship and project. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to thank my co-host for being here. Christina, thank you. Catherine, thank you. That's us. We'll see you again next week. And in the meantime, please comment below. Tell us your top tips for managing conflict at work. Do you agree with us? Do you not? Do you have tips from your own experience? Tell us in the comments below, please. And if you want to get in touch with us, if you want to write for the BA project, learn more about what we do, or just get a steer on how to get started as a BA or in tech, you can find us at thebaproject.ie or thebaproject.co.uk or simply at the BA Project across all social media. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself.
Bye.